Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I am here to talk about the books that I read in the month of October. That is going to be your full intro because we've got to jump in right away. I read a total of 16 books, 4 of which were rereads, and I have a book that I forgot to talk about in my September wrap-up, so I have 17 total books to talk about. We're just gonna jump in. I thought I would start out by talking about the book I failed to mention in my September wrap-up, that is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a lower YA book, I would say even almost approaching middle grade, about a town called Lucille where monsters no longer exist. And as you come to find out a little bit in the intro, monsters doesn't necessarily refer to actual monsters, but that is what we have in this future society decided to call perpetrators of horrible crimes. Our main character is a girl named Jenn. She is a black trans girl, and one day a monster climbs out of one of her mom's paintings, and it claims it is a monster hunter, but it is really difficult to convince anyone that this monster hunter could be real when they're also insistent that monsters don't exist anymore. This is a really fascinating book about how the evils and ills of society don't just disappear because you pretend they're not there. It is, as far as I know, the first traditionally published book with a trans person of color as a lead character, which is super awesome. This has a non-binary author. I'm really eager to read Akwaeke's first book, Freshwater, but this is a really interesting, intricately written YA book that is deeply unique and that I highly recommend. It was released back in September, so you can already grab yourself a copy. I think you personally should. I wound up rating this 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so now on to the October books I read. First, I'm going to talk about the 4 books I reread real quick. In October, I reread The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Hooray! I actually already have a reread vlog, 2 reread vlogs actually, up for these 4 books. This is like my second favorite series of all time. My reread vlogs I worked really hard on, and I hope you enjoy watching them if you haven't watched them already. Basically, I reread these 4 books in 48 hours. So 2 books the first day, 2 books the second day, and my vlogs are emotional and in-depth and are spoilerific for the entire series. Basically, I reread these books so that I could prep for Call Down the Hawk, so I can reread Call Down the Hawk when it comes out. I gave all of these 5 out of 5 stars and officially determined that Blue Lily Lily Blue is my favorite book of all time. So, if you want to hear more, go watch those vlogs, but clearly I gave all of these 5 stars. I adore them. For these remaining 12 books, I am going to go through them in order of rating, so we're going to start with my lowest rated book and work up to my highest rated book. October was amazing because besides The Raven Cycle, I had an additional 4 books that I rated 5 out of 5 stars, which is amazing. It's unheard of. I had one of the best reading months ever as far as discovering new favorites. So we're gonna start with my least favorite and then we'll work up to all of those 5-star reads. First up, we have Bingo Love. This is a comic by T. Franklin, Jenn St-Onge, and Joy San. This is a graphic novel about these 2 women who are pictured on the front. It is about them falling in love in the 60s, being torn apart, and then potentially getting back together again in like 2030, I think, at some point after the time period we are currently in. This was my least favorite read of October, which is super sad because this seems like a book that would be perfect for me, a story that would be perfect for me, but ultimately the takeaway I had for Bingo Love was that it felt very aimed at straight audiences as opposed to queer audiences. There was just a lot of emphasis on like how it's okay to be queer and love is love, which is fine, but it felt more like an exercise in showing how these 2 people couldn't be together in the 60s, and they can be now, and even though they still have bad feelings and even though their family hates them, it's okay that they like each other. So like that wasn't exactly my jam. Art was really nice. I don't think the writing was super strong. I think it was super stilted, especially with one of the daughters. I didn't like her dialogue at all, and overall, I just didn't really enjoy the process of reading this. I was reading the extras, and at some point I just stopped reading and gave up because I wasn't enjoying any of it. So I wound up giving this like a 2.5, maybe a 2 star. I want to celebrate it because it's about two queer women of color falling in love. It just felt like I wasn't the audience for this book. The audience for this book was middle-aged straight people. That's just me. Next up, I have Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a story collection, and it is one of 5 books I read during Spookathon. I have a very long Spookathon vlog up on my channel if you want to go watch it, and I give detailed reviews of every single story in this collection. I also have Goodreads reviews for most of these books that I will link down in the description below. This was a very middling book for me. I wound up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. 3 is the average. I rated each of these 8 stories individually, averaged them out. It was a 3 out of 5. I think that this had 2 really strong stories. The first one, The Husband Stitch, and then one later on called 8 Bites. But ultimately, I think the biggest issue with this is that pretty much every story had a really interesting setup, but it was trying so hard to be surreal that I couldn't even follow what was happening in most of the stories. Especially by the end, it just seemed like it was constantly trying to top itself to be more and more surreal, and I think that that was obscuring any of the points that these stories were trying to make. I really didn't like at all the novella that's in the middle of this, especially Heinous, which is basically the most famous story from this. It is a retelling of every episode of every season of Law & Order SVU. As a person who's never seen any SVU, I didn't care, and it just kept getting weirder and more difficult to follow. Check out my Goodreads review, because I go in depth into every story in this collection. I really wish the rest had been as strong as The Husband Stitch and 8 Bites. In particular, I really would have liked if The Resident and Real Women Have Bodies would have been a little stronger, because I loved the worlds for those 2 stories. They just kind of fell apart. So, 3 out of 5 stars, sadly, for this story collection. I will say that every story in here is queer, but some of them have trigger warnings for sexual assault, for abusive relationships, so just know that as well. Next, I have The Black Mage. This is by Danielle Barnes and DJ Kirkland. This was just sort of given to me at random at Book Expo, so I decided to give it a read. I went to Oni Press to grab a copy of the Tea Dragon Festival, and while I was there, they were like, oh, you might also like this. I didn't really love this. This graphic novel came out at the end of October. It is basically about the main character who has just been accepted into this prestigious magic school, but this magical school is completely white, and he is the first Black student that's ever been admitted. But engaging with like race issues in this book, it's very surface level, it's very stated. So the main character's name is Tom Token. He has a pet crow named Jim, and the school is kind of run by the KKK. So there's a lot happening here. I wish this would have been split into more volumes, because it felt like anytime there was a twist, it wasn't a twist, it was just introducing the world. Like, I wasn't shocked by any of the twists because I didn't know any different. I also wasn't a huge fan of the art style. I think that this could have some potential influence on younger audiences. I think kids might get a good, like, moral, a good takeaway from this, particularly if they really like Harry Potter. Then maybe you can introduce them to this story to learn a bit more about white supremacy and a history of white supremacy, especially in now fantasy worlds. But I didn't really enjoy the process of reading it, so I gave it 3 stars. World building, interesting, execution, not as great. Next we have Last Ones Left Alive by Sarah Davis-Goff. This is a book set in Ireland. It is a post-apocalyptic zombie story, basically. I am not one who traditionally reads zombie stories, so this was a bit out of my comfort zone. But this is about a girl named Orphan who is in her late teens, and she has been raised by 2 women, her mom and her mom's partner, and they are the only human beings Orphan has ever known. So we are learning about Orphan's life growing up in this situation, but it also, like, begins with Orphan having her mom's partner Maeve in a wheelbarrow, and she is just pushing her mom's partner's body places to try to get to a new location where maybe there is no zombie breakout. That feels very confusing to lay out, but really this is just sort of like, if you've watched a lot of zombie movies, you probably already know the plot of this. I just didn't think it was that original. I think it picked up at the very end, and it was super interesting, and I would have loved if this book started halfway through and then, like, continued on to where this book ended, and then a little bit after that, because that bit was so much more interesting. If you are relatively new to zombie stories, maybe this will be engaging, this would be a fun, like, intro, but while I liked the main character and I thought the writing was pretty good, the story just wasn't that engaging to me, so I wound up giving it 3 stars. Next up I have a thriller, In a Dark Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. I am not one who traditionally reads thrillers. I've read like a couple, but I tend to find thrillers somewhat disappointing. This basically got a 4-star rating because it didn't completely fuck up the end. That's my bar at this point. If you manage to stick any kind of landing with a thriller, I'm like, dear God, you are truly many steps above the rest. This book is about a writer who gets invited to a former friend's hen party, but they haven't seen each other in like 10 years, so she's really not sure why she's been invited. She decides to go anyway, and at this hen party, weird stuff starts to happen. This is kind of a locked room mystery. I think I enjoyed this because I grew up reading like Agatha Christie books, and this felt a lot like Agatha Christie. Very simple, very straightforward, a relatively easy mystery to guess, but it's pretty engaging to get through. Because of that, I got 4 stars. My bar is so low with thrillers. Next up, I want to talk about Hotel Dare. This is by Terry Blas and Claudia Aguirre, and this is basically about 3 siblings who go and visit their abuela at her old hotel in Mexico. And while they are there helping her clean, they discover that different doors in the hotel lead to different dimensions. I described this in my Spookathon vlog as Coco meets Fablehaven. And that's basically what this is. It's a very cute graphic novel. I think it has a really nice art style. I'm just like really into these characters and the character design. I had fun reading it. That's kind of it. Olive, this main character, is queer, and Charlotte has just become a member of this family. She was recently adopted, and this is very much just about, like, family is who you love, not who you're biologically related to, so I really liked that element. I thought it was a cute graphic novel. I gave it 4 stars. I also have A City Inside. This is by Tillie Walden. I happened upon this book at my library, and you may know that I love Tillie Walden. I am obsessed with Tillie Walden, so I've been trying to read more of her graphic novels, and I found this. It is so tiny. I read this book twice, and it took me less than 20 minutes to read it twice. But I think this also goes on record as the book that made me cry in the least amount of time ever. Like, I just hit a page in this book where I started crying, and I was like, I've read like 20 pages, and maybe 14 lines of dialogue. I'm already sobbing. It's really hard to describe this. I would say it's... I don't know how to describe this. I think it starts with some kind of therapy appointment, but it's some kind of like sci-fi therapy appointment. Basically, the point of this is that we experience multiple comings of age. The story of coming of age once isn't a true story because we're constantly rediscovering ourselves. It's also about being kind to yourself, about how the changes you may go through may not seem easy at first, but are ultimately for the best. And it's about creating a city inside yourself and being comfortable in the little corners of your personality, of your life, of your identity. So that's why it's kind of hard to describe. I gave this 4 stars. I adore Tillie Walden, and I think everyone should read her graphic novels. This is also queer, as all of Tillie Walden's graphic novels are, so I loved it. Next up, we have Sawkill Girls. This is by Claire Legrand, and this was my patron-chosen book for October. My patrons voted on a book for me to read in October. They chose Sawkill Girls, and this was the book that we read in my caravan group chat. So we had like a big discussion at the end of the month where we all read Sawkill Girls and talked about our feelings about it. This is... I'm gonna go with this as a fantasy book with three main characters, Marion, Zoe, and Val. And it's set in a place called Sawkill Rock, where for decades girls have gone missing. They've disappeared. But there is specifically a reason why these girls have gone missing, and Val knows the reason, and Marion and Zoe are both a part of possibly chasing this monster down who's been stealing girls. This is, like, fucking brilliant. Here's the thing. So much happened in this single book that this could have easily been a duology. Like, so much happened. But at the same time, I think everything that happened was really done with a lot of skill, so it didn't feel like I was being overwhelmed with information. I just kept thinking about how I couldn't believe a single book that's about 400 pages long was introducing characters, writing compelling character arcs, creating plot twists, working on different redemption arcs, introducing, like, mythology. So much happened in this book, but I never felt lost. I was with it the whole time. I think this is a brilliant comp title for the Raven Cycle. If you like the Raven Cycle and you're like, I wish there was a book like the Raven Cycle but about queer girls, read Sawkill Girls. Marion and Val are both queer. I think both bisexual, though Val might possibly be a lesbian, and Zoe is asexual. Zoe is the only character for whom asexuality is like an on-page rep. Marion and Val, I'm just kind of picking up pieces where Marion specifically says that she has been attracted to men and women, and Val, I want to say lesbian because the people that she describes having an actual connection to both identify as women, and she doesn't ever particularly say that she likes a boy that she's been dating, so I'm not sure there. Basically, I loved this. I thought it was fascinating. There were multiple points at which a line would completely knock me on my ass because this book is like a really, really great CC book. This is a CC read. It is weird, fantastical. It is super dark and creepy. Like, this scared me legitimately a couple of times, and I loved it. I wound up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I just think that there were some elements that weren't quite as there. It didn't quite push this to a 5-star read, but I still loved it and recommend it wholeheartedly. It was excellent. The sun is going down, so I'm sorry if the lighting keeps changing. Now let's talk about my 4 5-star reads. So, all of these are 5-star books. Oh my god. Let's talk first about Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. This is a story collection, and it is a debut author. This is Julia Armfield's first book. It was released at the beginning of October, and I adored it. It was comped to Carmen Maria Machado, so I read this at the beginning of the month, and a bunch of the reviews were saying, if you loved Her Body and Other Parties, you're gonna love this book. So when I loved this, it was really sad that it didn't go the other way. This collection is about womanhood, but it's about womanhood through horror and surrealist lenses. A lot of these are very creepy stories, but I also think it's written in an incredibly evocative way. Like, it's so visceral reading this collection. There are so many lines that, like, get under your skin, and they're horrifying, but I love it. To give you some examples of stories, the first story in this collection is a story called Mantis, which is about a girl going through a very different kind of puberty. She's not just going through puberty, she's becoming something new. I really loved Stop Your Women's Ears with Wax, which is about fanaticism following an all-girl band and about how they have kind of inadvertently or possibly intentionally created this girl army. And I loved it because it is this like particular way of celebrating women who are involved in bands who write lyrics that speak to girls, and you go kind of feral thinking about them. I loved almost every story in this collection. There was, I think, one that wasn't... two. There were two that I didn't like as much. Granite and Smack. Granite was good. Like, it concluded, but I think it could have been done better. Smack was my least favorite of the collection. I just don't think that much happened in Smack, so I didn't really like it. But the rest, I loved. This is such a good collection. I recommend it so highly. I gave it 5 stars. I also have All the Bad Apples by Moira Fowley-Doyle. If you want to hear more about this, I really encourage you to go watch my Spookathon vlog, particularly like the last update, which is focused on reviewing this book, because I don't know how much I'm going to be able to talk about it in this kind of more short form review. I love Moira Fowley-Doyle, so I was really excited about this release. This is about a 17-year-old girl named Dina, and on the day of her 17th birthday, she inadvertently comes out to her family, and her older sister is seen jumping from a cliff. Dina is the only one who is absolutely sure that her sister is not dead, but everyone else is kind of going through the motions, and then Dina starts receiving letters from her sister, who is potentially not alive, sending her on this scavenger hunt to uncover their family history. Because the women in this family have been sort of trailed by a history of bad luck, but the theory is that they don't just have bad luck, they've been haunted by a centuries-old curse. This book was going to be a 4-star read. Like, the whole time I was reading it, I was very much feeling 4 stars, but the last fourth, like, completely changed my view of what this book was about, and I love it. Because this book is about centuries of silence and about how silence just allows complacency and it allows the same atrocities to keep happening over and over and over again. It is about a history of mistreated women, particularly women mistreated for sexuality, whether that be queer sexuality or just desire. It's about centuries of punishing women for having children, whether or not it was something they wanted. It's like horrifying and uplifting, and it made me want to scream into the sky. Like, half of this is set in the modern day, the other half is just long-form letters that are describing history in Ireland about these women's family. I'm trying to remember when the first one is set. So it starts in 1858, and you're starting there and trying to catch up to 2012, which is when the rest of the book is set. This has a lesbian main character. Dina has a biracial, bisexual best friend. They also encounter another girl who likes girls on the path of trying to figure out this mystery, and it is just brilliant. It's brilliant in so many ways. This does have a lot of trigger warnings, so please look into that before you pick up this book if you have particular triggers, but I love it, and I think it should be essential YA reading. This is essential YA, in my opinion. I'm so glad I got the chance to read it. And obviously, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I have The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. This is sci-fi horror about queer girls, and I loved it, clearly. Clearly, that's where we're at with this wrap-up. This is about... I've never figured out how to say this main character's name. Is it Gyre? It's Gyre. I was pronouncing it Gyre as I was reading it, but that could be incorrect. Gyre, we're just gonna stick with that, has been hired to do this cave expedition on a foreign planet. If she completes it, she'll have the money she needs to get off of this planet, but she has an expedition leader who, more and more, it becomes apparent that she is not hesitant about pumping Gyre full of experimental drugs, about totally taking control of her body, and it becomes clear that this mission isn't originally what Gyre thought. This is one of the scariest books I've ever read. I had to read it with the lights on. There's like a quote on the back about how you have to read it with your lights on, and I was like, it's fine. I don't get scared by books. I'll be fine with it. No, this book scared the shit out of me. It's a ghost story. It's a sci-fi story. It is about kind of an enemies to potentially more relationship between queer girls, like that really fucked up weird power dynamic. It's explored supremely well. I just loved every page of this. This is a over 400 page sci-fi book, adult sci-fi, with tiny print, like tiny print, that I read in 2 days because I could not put it down. I highly recommend it. 5 stars. And the final book that I want to talk about is Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, which I've said in a few videos now, I think this is a perfect book. Like, if such a thing exists, that is what this is. This is initially set in Uruguay in the 1970s, and it is about 5 queer women who find solace in each other and in a small island. Basically, at the time this is set, Uruguay is in a period of political upheaval, a lot of political rebellion, there's a dictatorship happening, and queerness is absolutely forbidden. It's the sort of thing that will get you jailed forever. So these 5 women find each other, and they find a place called Cabo Polonio, where they name themselves Cantoras, because that is the only word that they have for women who like women, and this is set over decades of their lives as they go back to Cabo Polonio, as they bring new lovers, old lovers, as they fall into different relationships, and as you continue to follow the political struggle of Uruguay. It's absolutely brilliant. This is another one of those books that's like a perfect CC read because it is historical fiction about queer women, and I just loved it. Like, I sobbed reading this book. I really wasn't prepared to, but there is a point in the latter bit of this book where I just completely broke. I had to stop reading for a minute just so I could kind of hug this book and sob, because this book is a celebration of queer identity, particularly the queer identity of women of color, but it is also a shared mourning of queer lives that existed in the past that we may never know about, that we don't know about, that weren't allowed to live as their full selves. It's so good. It's so good. I was recommended this book so highly from Adriana over at the channel Perpetual Pages. I talk about their channel like every chance I get. Literally, when I requested this book for review, when you request a book for review, you're supposed to talk about yourself and why it is a good idea for that publisher to send you a book, and in this email, I was literally still like, I know about this book because of Adriana. They're amazing. Look at this review that they did for this book. It's why I want to read it. Like, that's not what you're supposed to do in those emails. It's good that they looked past that and still agreed to send me this book, because I loved it. 5-star read. And that is it. We reached the end. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed hearing more about all of these books that I read in the month of October. If you have read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments below your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Plus, be sure to let me know what your favorite book was that you read in the month of October. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!